everyone. Today we have our new episode and we will discuss on carbon removal credits. This is very important. Even Bangladesh recently introduced this carbon removal credit. If you have more than one car, if you produce more carbon, so you have to provide the carbon removal credit. So this is very interesting policy and procedure. So we have our world famous speaker, Mr. David Smith, Mr. David Schumacher, Mr. Rob. Thank you for joining today. First, I would like to give chance Mr. David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you for letting me be part of the program today and for what we can do. The carbon removal credits are very interesting because they're a type of carbon credit that represents when you remove 1 ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And you do that through many different technologies, but into a carbon reduction project and plans. Also, carbon credits are a currency for the trading carbon emissions in the carbon market. And I have seen corporations and other things buy this type of carbon removal credits as a way to help them begin to meet their commitments they have to become more green as a company. And you know, these carbon removal, carbon reduction projects can include natural engineering methods to absorb CO2, such as photosynthesis, direct air capture, all different types of other technologies and chemical reactions and mineral ways to produce them. And carbon removal credits, though, are different from reduction credits, which represent when emissions are prevented or reduced by changing management practices, by changing production practices. So one of them is trying to reduce the amount going out. The other one is taking what is already out in the ecosystem and removing it from the ecosystem. So like I said, one is carbon removal credits, and the other one is just carbon reduction type of credits, which you see there. And you see them used in many different ways and how you can put them in place and do it. And you begin to see that, you know, if you look at the world, our global CO2 levels in the atmosphere are still high. It's about 35 or 40% higher than it should be. And we're no longer, unfortunately, in a position where just reducing our emissions is probably enough. We've actually reached, I think, the crossover point where we have to remove the excess CO2 and clean the atmosphere and put it back to a healthier, more sustainable level. You know, some of the things we can do are naturally. You know, we know through photosynthesis with trees and others, they can help convert the carbon dioxide into biomass. We know we can do direct air capture and storage and put in there. We know we can do enhanced weathering, where through we can create natural artificial minerals to remove and capture the CO2. There's something called blue carbon, where we can begin to use different parts of the world's ocean ecosystem, such as mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, and even algae, to sequester the carbon dioxide through plants. We can do other things as well, such as move it into the soil and crop roots, and many different ways to begin to use it. But it all comes at a cost. The cheaper cost is not to permit the emissions to get out. And, you know, that is the least expensive cost. The bigger cost, though, is to actually go and use what carbon removal credits for, is to actually remove it from the atmosphere and put it in a place where the atmosphere actually is cleaner because it was removed, versus the prevention that goes in there. Now, the reality is we need to do both of those, and both of them are going to be necessary. But this helps set the stage, I think, for how they're different and what this means. So, Sharif, I think that's a pretty good way to jump into this.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, hello everyone. David Smith, thanks for that great introduction to the topic. I want to talk about this from the opportunity of doing something about it, of implementing it. And I'm coming at that from the angle of what are the opportunities out there for individuals, businesses, that sort of thing, to be able to participate. So this would be perhaps an opportunity for somebody to participate in a meaningful way for something that they care about. And because of the carbon removal credits, as David Smith was talking, there are financial incentives for being able to do this, and this puts this in the realm of businesses, of entrepreneurs. Yesterday we talked about startups on this show, and there could be startups in this area as well to be able to work in this economy. So what are some of those? Well, let's say organizations themselves may participate in what they call voluntary carbon offset programs, and they can purchase credits and offset for whatever their footprint might be. Now, it's not an opportunity, but it does offer an opportunity for those that wish to set up where those credits would be used. Other companies might have specific projects for removal that they might take on, and then there might be opportunities for entrepreneurs in that area to be able to pitch services to those companies. Conservation and land management can play a part in this. David Smith already talked about direct air capture, so there's entrepreneurial opportunities in that area. And he also talked about some of the blue carbon projects that are out there. So I want to put the focus on this from the standpoint of how can business be involved, use the financial incentives, and drive towards the goal that we want. In developing nations, Dr. Sharif, there's entrepreneurial opportunities to restrict carbon emissions from the beginning, green energy projects, and so forth, that entrepreneurs can become involved with. So there is a direct market-based means for being able to work with what we're talking about today. And those are my opening remarks.
Mr. Rao.
Well, carbon credits and carbon offsets. So the goal of the effort is to make a meaningful impact on reducing carbon in the environment, and to address some of the ongoing problems with companies that have much higher cost in doing so, to provide some type of a collaborative method of reducing overall atmospheric carbon. Those that are generating the credits then can sell those credits to others that have difficulty doing it. They are effective for Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 2 emissions apparently are not approved for carbon credits at the moment. The difficulty comes in terms of how they could be misused. Carbon credits can be used for greenwashing. They can make a company appear to be green that is not, and that can be problematic. So oversight is kind of part and parcel to any type of a carbon credit program, to make sure that the program works as is expected to work, to actually remove carbon from the environment, and not to cover up for the unwillingness of some companies to make the effort to solve their problems. particularly in areas where carbon credits are cheaper than actually doing the work, you could have issues whereby things that should be fixed are not fixed, and the company is not penalized for not doing what they should be doing. So again, there's a certain aspect of enforcement here that is required to make the underlying program work. The goals, of course, as I mentioned, are noble. The provide a method for a variety of companies that can easily remove carbon, and companies that have difficulty, to collaboratively make the overall process more economical. But as I say, the danger is for those that can't remove the carbon. It kind of puts that problem off into the future until that process can become cheaper. And if the goal is to remove virtually all aspects of carbon introduction into the atmosphere, then in that case, carbon credits may slow down the overall effort, as they allow people to extend their unfortunately bad practices off into the future. Overall, carbon credits are viewed as positive as opposed to negative right now. Though there is ongoing discussion by both camps whether it really makes sense. The folks that are absolutists tend to think that everybody should be removing carbon from the atmosphere. Changing credits from one company to another just pushes the goal off into the future. It doesn't bring it in near term. On the other hand, having carbon credits has provided progress and allowed things to be done economically that otherwise might not be. And companies do have a responsibility to their board and their stockholders to make a profit. And so demanding companies become unprofitable to remove carbon from the environment is a non-viable path. They're simply not going to do that. So the carbon credits do allow for progress and, to a certain extent, a higher visibility on these overall efforts, while making them slightly or substantially, depending on the company, more profitable. So it's an interesting program. I think we'll look back at this in 50 years and decide whether it was successful or not. But it was an innovative way to address what continues to be a long-term problem with regard to the introduction of carbon to the atmosphere and related global climate change. So I'll pass the hat over to Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Martley.
No, it definitely seems like a very vital conversation, and one that we need to pay attention to. A lot of people have been paying attention to how bad carbon emissions and other things have been in the Western world, as well as just in the world in general. And definitely it does seem like these carbon credits are definitely doing a lot to get people involved in the space. And it is definitely an interesting financial model. And that's my understanding that there are going to be a number of these that will be in place by 2030. So that's not that long. They're actually saying that carbon credit trading is set to hit something like 50 billion by 2030. So that's a lot of these that'll be going on, and a lot of these will be, as folks mentioned, startup type businesses. And as I was reading and doing some research, I saw that these startups were from a number of the European countries, including Germany, France, and of course here in the United States, and a number of other places, including Finland. But one of the things that I was seeing, because I'm not as aware as I probably should be of all of this aspect of the carbon credit type deal, is that a lot of it seemed to be tied in, as I was reading, into something that is very popular, and maybe my other fellow panelists can talk about the benefits or the non-benefits of this, because one of the things that I was seeing was that a lot of it was tied to decentralization. And I do have friends in the metaverse that are very much into decentralization and blockchain and all of that. And quite a few of those that I were reading about seem to be in that same lane. So not knowing enough as I should know about it, I'd love to hear from Rob and the two Davids as to how much of what we're seeing with the carbon credits and the environmental movement is tied into what is also going on with decentralization, which I know quite a few of my friends and associates are very big fans of, because way too often, the banks and some of the banking systems that are plugged into some of our kind of capitalistic kind of things that aren't as necessarily environmentally conscious are more in the mainstream banking and the mainstream investment. So it does seem like the carbon credits are an alternative form of credits, and it does seem like a lot of that is tied into the blockchain and things along those lines, including crypto and some of the other things. But that's what I was finding in my own research. But if I am incorrect in that, please correct me and let me know, because that's what this is. It is a learning process for us all, myself included. But that is one of the things that first caught my eyes and all in that space. So how much of it is tied to this lovely idea of decentralization?
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.
Mark, you always ask good questions, and unfortunately, your question is it depends. There's part of it which is tied to some decentralization, but for the most part, it's not. There's exchanges being put in place for being able to trade carbon credits, and particularly carbon reduction credits, which have a higher value than carbon credits. Once again, to set the stage again, carbon credits are when you prevent the pollution from leaving the factory or whatever it is. Carbon reduction is when you actually take what has already been released, the CO2, out of the air and remove it from the air. So two different types of credits with two very different ways of looking at them, and how that can be used. So they're similar but different, and the way you monetize them, the way you trade them, can be different as well too. And to answer your question another way, the jurisdiction where this is actually moved the furthest along is actually in the EU. And the EU has actually last year put together a certification process for certifying the different types of removal systems and things with it. And there already have been some ways that it's been set up before, but what they've actually done in the EU is they've set out a carbon removal. It's still a lot of details around it to be put in place, but it really can lay the groundwork for government-approved removal around the world. And it really is what's needed for us to be able to do the type of trading and things. If you look under COP and others, for example, the EU has committed to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 and be net zero by 2050. And so you begin to see that, but you put in places like this. And also there's a number of exchanges that have gone up, and a number of groups which are proposing new exchanges for different ones done. There's a group that's particularly the ones in the EU, and it's called the Carbon Market Watch. And they're trying to see how that can be incorporated, how it can be used, how can it be used as a system to go ahead and move it forward. The bottom line really is on this. You like I said before, you've got to do both of them. If you're going to get to the net zero standard, you have to remove it, but you also have to be net zero, you have to prevent it from actually going out and causing greenhouse gas in the first place. So it has to be captured there. So Mark, it's one where you've got to take both sides of the coin. I can remove the carbon dioxide from the air, which is what we need to do to get the levels to a safe level. But to become net zero, I have to prevent it from happening in the first place out of our processes, be it an automobile, a factory, airplanes, or whatever. So you have to prevent it from there. So it really is taking both of those to work together to meet the targets to become net zero. And I hope, Mark, that answers your question.
No, that definitely answered to some degree. But one of the things that I was thinking about is that I'm definitely a big fan of environmentalists, actually. I mean, even a fan of direct action environmentalists, because one of my favorite books of all times was a book called Ecotage, which was actually, some people would consider him a environmental terrorist because he would literally go in and dump dead fish on people that were poisoning things in Michigan and other parts of the Midwest. And that gentleman is now passed on, but he definitely wrote that book, Ecotage, which is definitely a book that many folks in the environmental justice movement know about and all in that space. But I know, if I can play the devil's advocate, that one of the arguments that corporate America will give you is that it costs too much to do the cleaning that we would like to do, and all in that space. So I'm imagining these carbon credits can help some of those corporations. But is that one of the arguments that is given? And this is for anybody on the panel, in terms of the carbon credits, because I do know that, historically speaking, major corporations have always been a little bit reluctant to do any kind of cleaning that they need to do because of this cost factor. And we do know that the cost factor is even greater in terms of pollution and the damage of pollution. But sometimes corporate America, unfortunately, is looking at the bottom dollar. So this is for anybody. Is that one of the reasons for these carbon credits, is to alleviate some of that argument from our corporate brethren?
I personally think it's not just to alleviate it from the corporate brethren, because the governments themselves have a lot of things which generate greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. I mean, if you begin to think, for example, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine right now, it has spiked totally, very high in that part of the world, the percentage of greenhouse gas. Uh, you know, jet fighters on afterburners, rockets with their fuel being released in it. Tanks, for example, have no exhaust control system. So you don't have things removing it from them at all. And so those have contributed to it. So it's not just, Mark, the commercial sector. It's really when you look at all the different sources of how it's going. And again, there's two targets. There's one target is to remove carbon dioxide, to remove greenhouse gas that's already in the atmosphere. But to meet the net zero, it has to be prevent it from happening in the first place.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher.
Well, a fascinating discussion, as it always is, and yeah, appreciate the interaction among the panelists. I want to go back to talking about opportunity in this area. I opened that up briefly and broadly first time around. I wanted to focus on that just a little bit more and talk about who are the carbon removal entrepreneurs out there. And I don't mean by giving names, but I mean, what kind of work are they doing? You know, they can be individuals, they can be startups, they can be companies, but they're all engaged in somewhere in developing, implementing, selling carbon removal projects, maybe the associated credits. What kind of entrepreneurs do that? So clearly there would be project developers that, you know, identify projects for carbon removal, and maybe they specialize in reforestation or those blue carbon projects that we talked about earlier. An area that interests me is technology innovators. They can focus on commercializing new carbon removal technologies. And I was actually hoping to hear about one of those this morning from one of our usual contributors. I wish he could have been here. There are entrepreneurs that focus on carbon offset platforms. And by platforms, I mean online platforms that connect buyers and sellers and facilitate this market. And there can be new ways to do that, as we've seen how technology has affected other markets, financial and otherwise. Service providers, those that are going to help implement and do in place of, say, companies that can't for themselves, or even governments. Credit brokers, David Smith talked about some of that, and sustainable investment firms, where to put your money for those that are conscious about wanting to do this and wanting to invest as well. So there definitely is entrepreneurial space available. And I tend to think that that can be a big driver in making positive changes as we move towards 2030 and beyond.
Well, I can help you out because as I was doing some research, I came across some of these, so I thought I'd just give a rundown for our listeners of a few of those that I found and all in that space, and just give, since you don't want to give the names, I'll give a couple of names and we'll hear what they are doing and everything. But Carbon Future is one, and apparently their founders, and it looks like they are based in Germany, wanted to certify biochar projects, but found the technical and financial solutions were not in place to do so. So they set about building them first. And apparently biochar is a form of charcoal that prevents CO2 from entering the atmosphere and is made from organic material that would otherwise be wasted, like crop residue. So that definitely sounds like something that even the farmers in America might be interested in as well. And then there is Puro Earth, which apparently built a carbon removal standard registry and marketplace, and they're based in Finland. So they have got some backers, including the Finnish energy company Fortum and NASDAQ, of all people, which acquired the company last year. And that startup established its own standard and methodology for engineered carbon removal, including for biochar, once again, construction material, soil amendments, and carbon capture and storage. And of course, off of this, you can find it on Business Insider. But Penna Earth was another, and they have certified the carbon storage capabilities of forests, and they are based in Germany as well. So they set up a forest carbon project, which currently entails high costs, long lead times, and requires expert guidance, according to their own website. And they are building a platform to certify a forest carbon storage capabilities and connect landowners, very much important to people to connect, to carbon credit buyers in an effort to improve access to voluntary carbon market for smaller landowners. And then I'll just give a couple of other ones that I saw, which are B0 Carbon. And apparently they are based in the UK, and they are built a platform to inform people buying and selling and investing in carbon credits on their quality. So it calls itself the first global full service rating agency for the voluntary carbon market. So that is one that is out of Germany. And then Agrina helps farmers get paid for carbon sequestration. And I probably totally mispronounced that word, but they are totally based in Denmark, and they are helping farmers get paid for turning their land into carbon sinks. So the 48-person company was originally founded as a commodity trading marketplace for farmers in 2018, but pivoted to become an internationally accredited soil carbon certification program in 2021. So that's just a few of those that I saw. I'll give one more because they look like a nice, lovely couple. But Single Earth is tokenizing carbon credits for forests and greenlands, and they are based in Estonia. So Single Earth is the result of a hackathon. So it was actually, some of these projects can come out of hackathons, and that was on the future of wood, in which co-founder Merit Validcello set out to find a solution to decentivize forestry destruction after growing up watching Estonia's intensive forestry. So apparently there's an intensive forest industry in Estonia, and they were saying that our forests are cut down for timber. We want to find a way to stop that, to help landowners. There's those landowners again, keep forests growing. I understand that the reason why owners cut down the forest is not because they want to, but because this is the only way they can earn money from the resources that they own. Together with co-founder Andros Azleid, the pair set about monetizing nature for something more than just raw material to help finance nature production and protection. So that's just about 5 or 6, and there are a couple of other ones that are in that article as well, but that was a few that I found.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith. Mr. David Schumacher.
Well, Mark, thanks for putting some names metaphorically faces to the idea of entrepreneurship there. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that let's not leave it to somebody else to do. Part of my reason today for giving the types of entrepreneurs that are out there is to be able to spark interest, perhaps, or to try to do that anyway among Dr. Sharif's listeners and maybe his home country, maybe among the youth that are there. What can they do to get involved? And it doesn't need to be seen as a charity activity. This is a good activity that can and should be supported by the market, and the credit system that we've talked about opens up that possibility. And entrepreneurship can take advantage of that and develop even beyond that, because as I believe it was Rob who said, there can be downsides to leaning too heavily on the credits. So we have some general areas that we can expand into. We have some specific examples, and I would like to encourage the youth or anybody that's entrepreneurially inclined to take a look and say, if you're going to develop a project, maybe this is calling you. Maybe this has your name on it.
Yeah,
And I'll leave it there for now.
Hey Rob, I gotta tease you because I one of the ones that I didn't get to out of the 11. I think I named 6 of them and everything. But you and me and even David Smith and I guess the other David and I know Sharif are big fans of culture and cultural icons and everything. And one of the companies that I did not get to that I'll name now, they are named after an iconic brand, because if you know anything about cartoons and everything, when I think of Toucan, I think of Toucan Sam. And apparently there is this company in Switzerland that is literally their name is a toucan. So when I read that, I was going like, hey, that sounds like that cartoon character, even though they are on a very serious mission, because Toucan in Switzerland is on a mission to build a decentralized climate finance ecosystem, which it hopes to achieve by bringing carbon credits onto the blockchain through tokenization. But I couldn't help but think of like Toucan Sam. I'm sure you would see the same thing if you saw that name, Rob, because I know that you, of all people, definitely remember that character and all along those lines.
David Smith.
Oh, Sharif, thank you. Sorry, my finger wasn't fast enough earlier. I agree with what both David and Mark is saying there, but there's so many different interesting projects in this area. And at the last 2 COP meetings, one of them, the COP meeting was to focus on the big players, the big companies, countries and companies. The last COP meeting really focused on the developing world and how can money be made available to the developing world to have that type of impact that both David and Rob and Mark have been talking about. And you see that happening. If you look at places like in Spain, Barbados, Sierra Leone, and others, they're trying to put together a new coalition of people to, in addition to what happened at the last COP meeting, to begin to help finance the world's poorest countries in being able to do something like this. They've actually, the initiative is called Power Our Planet, Act Today, Save Tomorrow. It is part of that one to make these type of projects, not just in the most developed nations, but the developing nations too. And it really is trying to look at a way to shift the way the world's financial system works to help these countries fight climate change and also poverty. The other problem we've had is, particularly because of the pandemic and stuff, there's a huge shortage globally of people. For example, Australia had a huge project to increase hydropower projects there. And it's been now delayed out to past 2018 because there is a shortage of skilled workers and there's supply chain disruptions everywhere. And this project is going to reduce a wide number of coal-fired power plants. which should reduce greenhouse gas. You see the same thing in Dutch. There's a target there to build 3 gigawatts of offshore power. But again, part of what it's doing is they're having a shortage of skilled manpower there in the supply chain. So it's being reduced some, but it's there. You begin seeing more, not just how do I do it, but how do I store it? How can I take things? So we've seen, things like Li batteries and carbon batteries and use. Just in the last week or so, I know I tweeted about a couple of projects where they're using water and pumping water into old mine shafts and things as a way to store energy and be able to pull it out by releasing the water over and over in a closed cycle to generate power that way. So both as a storage and power generation. We're also seeing, though, that the world is right now in a major rebalancing after Russia cut the pipeline supplies to EU, for example, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing that adjusting. We also know that there's intense pressure. Around the world to reduce profits in some of the energy companies that have been making very obscene profits while this is going, and there's work on that. But there is a lot of more places where you're seeing it. You're seeing more wind turbines. You're seeing other alternatives to fossil fuel based forms of power generation, even though it's not a long-term solution. It is not energy negative. You're seeing electric vehicles becoming pushed harder and harder to get there. And, industry's changing. Industry has to change to meet these targets. And it's taking both the governments and industry. And again, like Talif keeps telling us on topics like this, the other big problem here is the average citizens don't know their part of this. They don't understand what this is. They don't understand the importance of reducing the greenhouse emissions. They don't understand the importance of removing the greenhouse emissions from the atmosphere. So there needs to be education from top to bottom, from the government leaders to the business leaders down to the common citizens. And it needs to begin through all parts of the education process, even probably going back into how you do the work in education and in grade schools and things, and how can I increase that and how can I do it? So to me, it's this whole system of systems stuff we often talk about, and this is a place where you can see it happening all around. So Sharif, thank you.
Hey, speaking of that and everything,
Thank you.
sometimes when we look at the smaller countries, and I know that you're in that Malaysia area, but some of the folks that have been doing leading innovations actually came from smaller countries. Actually, a family friend who passed away not that long ago was actually one of the founders of the Bermuda Environmental Sustainability Task Force. So they were doing a lot of environmental actions, including stuff around carbon and other issues there in the small island of Bermuda. And like I said, Stu Hayward was a longtime family friend and definitely one of the folks that has worked in the past with my dad when they were having a cooperative farm and a number of other things. But he actually was one of the few folks that got into politics in Bermuda without the backing of a major political party in that area, and is also a Howard person that did some of his work in education at Howard University. But definitely, if you go and study him, you will see that he was a devout environmentalist and did a lot of work around sustainability, including found that organization that I mentioned. And that's in a country that is very small, that a lot of people only think about it because of the Bermuda Triangle and, of course, it being a vacation spot. But they did do a lot of major work in that sense. And like I said, it was last year in 2022 that he passed away at the age of, I want to say, around 80 or something along that line. But it was definitely a pioneer in that environmental movement.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
David saying
All
something.
right. had to find the mute button. Okay, so we've kind of been drifting all over the map here. Moving back to carbon credits and carbon removal. One of the interesting capabilities or financial capabilities that's come up recently is advanced market commitment. Now, advanced market commitments were developed mostly on the medical side to create vaccines. What they did is they allowed people to invest in the development of a vaccine in exchange for getting a favorable price for that vaccine at the back end. Well, the same methodology, advanced market commitment, has been applied to carbon credits, specifically carbon removal. A company called Frontier has popped up with this idea that companies can then buy in, and about large, I think it's 10 multinationals have bought into this so far, that you can buy into the development of carbon removal technologies in exchange for favorable purchasing of the related carbon removal credits. And from a standpoint of the overall correction of the world, removal is probably the more effective path, because you need to get out what's there. Just dropping to carbon zero or net zero, where you're not producing anymore, doesn't really get rid of what's already there, nor does it help with other countries, companies that are not at net zero, where carbon removal starts to correct the problems of the path. And so this methodology allows for firms to invest in the future of the planet in exchange for a future economic benefit and a future climate benefit, the results. And the goal is then, with pooled money and resources, focused on reducing the cost of carbon removal and increasing its scalability, because right now carbon removal doesn't scale particularly well. Increase its scalability then results in a favorable outcome, and it's economically attractive to the companies doing the effort. So just an interesting concept where they took something that was used to develop a vaccine and applied the same methodology to solve another problem. I should point out that this methodology is the advanced market commitment methodology. It's designed specifically for problems that are too big for one company, one country to solve. It is an aggregating methodology to pull together the amount of financial support you need to make real progress, and then share the benefits across the folks that invest. So kind of a carrot, somewhat hidden stick aspect of the program, because clearly if you're not investing and then you need to buy those carbon credits, you're going to pay a premium. So you're effectively buying into a club that gives you a discount on something that benefits the planet. I think it's incredibly beneficial, and I'll pass the hat.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher. Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, me too, fumbling for the mute button. Anyway, I'm here now. Rob, thank you for that about advanced market commitment. I want to look into that. That's very interesting. Matter of fact, I've got something from what everybody had to say, but that particular one was something I wasn't aware of at all. I'd like to look into that. I can see some great benefit for that. These, Dr. Sharif, these are going to be my concluding remarks. I'm going to need to go after this, and continue with the same theme that I've had, which is the entrepreneurial aspect of this. So, as a carbon removal credit entrepreneur, focus on developing and implementing projects that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and generate carbon removal credits. Yesterday, I already mentioned that yesterday we had a show on startups, and this would be, there's opportunities for startups in this area too. And you would start with the same process of research and identifying the particular opportunity for your startup, whether it be in those areas that we talked about, reforestation, direct air capture, blue carbon projects, and on. Go back and look at that show from yesterday to get an idea, and we talked through a little bit of what's the process involved and how you would go about doing that if you're not familiar with the idea of taking on and evaluating an entrepreneurial project. But that's what I really want to encourage today. And with that, I'll listen for a little bit, but I'm going to have to go soon. Thank you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I love what we're doing here and what's being done and everything that's said is so good. And, you know, I love some of particularly what Rob has said, where he's talking about both the concepts and then how to apply the concepts. And we have to begin to do that going forward. And how do we get it? How can we accelerate it? You know, it's what is should be happening in the next week or two is the Economic Forum's Growth Summit 2023, and its topic is going from financing to a transition of ending energy poverty, and that's part of where it's going, part of what can be done. And we need to go ahead and see how we can set that in place and how to do it. So that to me is part of the thoughts of where we are with this right now.
Thank you. Mr. Martley.
Yeah, I guess the question I've got, and this is for everybody on the panel, but those that are listening as well, is we have mentioned the startups and the startup aspect and the aspect of these carbon credits. And I mentioned earlier the amount of money that is being generated by these carbon credits and everything. But as y'all were talking, I was thinking of a friend of mine that recently, I should say more of an acquaintance, launched a rechargeable battery company and everything. Now it's to make sure that if you are stuck in the middle of nowhere, that you can literally charge your cell phone and all in that space. So that seems to me that that would be something that would be eligible for some of these carbon credits, because that might be something that could protect the carbon footprint and all in that space. And the same with some of my friends that are driving electrical cars. But I guess the question I have for everybody on this panel is, if you are a startup and you are interested in getting a carbon credit, where is even the information provided to give you said carbon credit and all in that space? Because I think that that's one of the things that we've got to make available, is the wherewithal to know how to get the credits that we are talking about. Because we can say that there are tons of these credits available, including available for the startups. But if the startup, and I can guarantee you that if I went to Durham, North Carolina, and went to any startup that I thought of and said, hey, if you thought about applying for a carbon credit, their first question would be, what the hell is a carbon credit and where do I get one? So that is a question that I think we've got to make aware, is whether you live in Malaysia or whether you live in Durham, North Carolina, how do you go about applying and getting said credits and getting this money that is out there? Because we can say that there's money out there all day long, but if nobody knows how to get to the money, then it becomes a mute point to many of the entrepreneurs. So Rob and David, you're the two that are left here and everything. And so whether you're in Sharif's class or whether you are, as some of my friends are, hearing us talk and everything, going like, wow, this sounds like some amazing money and some amazing opportunities. I want to help the environment. And I named all them companies earlier. And as you notice, many of them were in England. I did not, or the European market. I did not hear of any of those that I mentioned that were in Latin America, North America, or Africa, or a number of other places. And some of our listeners may be going like, hey, I've got an idea, just like that forestry lady did, or gentleman, can't remember what it was. It was actually a couple that are in Estonia. I've got an idea. How do I get this money and everything? So where would they go to learn about said credits?
Well, let me just give you my
Thank
quick
you.
answer. There are so many opportunities for that. They can go to the World Economic Forum. They have one. They have Clearinghouse. They can go to the International Development Bank. They can go to the World Bank, Credit Suisse. There are probably 30 different clearinghouses now on funding for this, Mark. Some regionally, many of them globally. There's new funds being set up in addition to the ones that came out of COP27. So if they're good on searching on the computer, there's no shortage of places for them to go.
Okay. Fair enough. But like I said, hopefully folks are listening and they will do that said due diligence. But as y'all were talking, I was going like, I know some folks that would probably be very much interested, as I said earlier, but they probably don't even have any clue that those opportunities exist, because I don't know that we always do a great job of letting people know even when they come out of things like Credit Suisse and some of these conferences and all in that.
Well, and Mark, that's why I said education is so important.
Right, I agree with
This
you.
has not been educated well, and we need to do it at all levels, not just the policymaker level.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely agree with you on that.
Mr. Rob.
Well, I don't have anything else to add. If I was focusing my education on what to do here, it would be on carbon removal as the more viable path. When you're talking about trying to restrict carbon emissions, you put you at cross purposes to the manufacturing, sales, and operations side of a company, and so you're constantly swimming upstream.
Right.
Because you're making products more costly. And so you're doing a good thing, but you're at cross purposes to what the company wants to accomplish. And that can be very aggravating. I've been several jobs like that over time, and while they can be rewarding, they can also be very aggravating. And carbon, when you focus on carbon removal, however, now you're focused on now you're aligned with whatever the company is doing, which is removing carbon from the atmosphere. So you're part of the group that is driving revenue, not part of the group that is restricting it. And so also, I think it's a better path to fixing the underlying problem. So looking at creative ways to find funding, as I mentioned earlier, or just focusing on really making sure you're in a company where everything you're doing is aligned with what the company wants to do, can probably end up being a far better career path, and certainly far less aggravating than the alternative. So best of luck out there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Robin. I know we're winding down and everything, but I had the pleasure on the Pod TV show, and that's the network that I am part of and everything. But I had the pleasure of having a woman that literally did what you just said. She became a farmer after going to medical school because she was frustrated by the medical school thing. So she decided that she wanted to be a farmer and pursue her career of actually her true passion and her true love. So she literally moved to the Black Mountains of North Carolina from Florida because she was realizing that medical school was not for her and all in that lane. So sometimes
Just to figure that out early.
Huh?
Just to figure that out early.
She did. She's like, once she's in her early mid-20s. So she just literally graduated from college, was going on the route of medical school and was like, no, this is not for me. So she literally quit her job and is now forming her own conscious living course and doing public speaking, and is definitely bought some land up there in Black Mountains and is literally running her own farm as a single woman up there as well. So definitely she figured it out at a very early stage.
Oh, good for her. That's great.
Yeah.
Are you going to wrap us up?
Mr. Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today?
That was it. Those were my concluding remarks through today.
Okay,
So
thank
thanks.
you. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Mark, do you have anything to share?
No, I think I pretty much covered everything that I was going to share. But as we've kind of alluded to, definitely do your due diligence in terms of research. I think that is something that has been a key factor of what we're talking about, and definitely go after those opportunities, but also try to find that purpose that you have in life and pursue that purpose, even those of your students that are out there that are watching now. And I would just leave it on both of those two fronts. One, do the due diligence in research and try to find that purpose of yours in life. And once you find that purpose, pursue it with all the passion that you have.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's sessions. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Rob, and thank you, Mr. Markley, for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Oh, well.